welcome to our esteemed trainer, Rasha Kutty, founder and chief facilitator at the Empathy University. Rasha's transformative workshops and certification programs in empathy, inclusion, listening, and psychological safety have left a lasting impact on global organizations, including Google, Target, and Defense Research and Development Organization of India. I would now invite Rasha to come on stage and take us through the workshop.
Hello, everyone. All right. So this is what I'll be covering, finding the B in DEIB. That being said, I'll mostly be speaking about empathy. That's my expertise. Maybe I'll touch upon why or what role empathy has when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But mostly, I'll be taking you through empathy as a skill, right? The importance of it, how you can develop it, and a lot of things. And we'll do a couple of activities on the way, right? Yeah. So everyone's here after, I guess, a lot of your own commitments. Maybe there are things that are going to happen tomorrow or day after which you're really thinking about. Maybe something has happened the past week which you're still sitting with. So just to kind of get everyone to be more present for the rest of the session, or once I begin the session, I would really like to do a short self-empathy exercise. We'll be covering what self-empathy is as well as we go along. But to begin with, it's basically a centering exercise, just to center yourself so that you're more present, right? And so all you have to do is just follow what I'm saying, like just follow my instructions, my voice, and everything will be good, right? So I'd invite you to begin with to just sit very comfortably, find a very comfortable sitting position. All right, wonderful. And then you can gently close your eyes. I promise not to look at anyone, so close your eyes. And take a long, deep breath, deeper than you've taken all day so far. And as you exhale, listen to my voice and let it ground you into the present moment. Continue to focus on your breaths as you breathe in. Feel the oxygen nourish you and then breathe out. And now tell yourself, there's nowhere else I need to be. There's nothing else I need to be doing right now, except giving myself this time and space for my own well-being and my own care. And I'm going to take you through a quick body scan. And what I want you to do is notice any tension, any strong emotions, any sensations. It could be pain from something that hurt you one of the previous days, or it could be anything. It could be tightness somewhere in your body, right? So as I take you through the body scan, try to be very aware of what's happening in your body, starting with your head, your scalp, your face, eyes, nose, your mouth, your chin, and your neck. Your shoulders. That's one place where tension sometimes hides. And as I as I name each part of your body, just also try to relax that part of your body. Your chest, your stomach, your back, your arms, and your hands all the way down to the tip of your fingers. And your legs, all the way down to your feet. Placed against the floor. And make an intention to push aside any negative sensations, feelings, stress, tension. And instead adopt a more positive feeling, whatever it is for you, whatever positive feelings mean for you. Let's take a few more last deep breaths before we begin the session. So breathe in, hold it for a beat, and breathe out. Once again, breathe in, and breathe out. Last one. Let it be your deepest breath yet. Breathe in. Hold it. And breathe out. And when you feel ready and comfortable, you may very slowly, very gently open your eyes and bring your awareness back to the room, back to all of us. Thank you. Thank you very much for doing that. Did it help? Yeah? Wonderful. Did it not help anyone? Just curious. There's always someone who, wouldn't really benefit from something like this, and that's completely okay. It's just the way it is. So I'm just curious, how easy was it for you to focus during the centering exercise? Did anyone find it hard? No. It was very easy? Yeah. I do see someone, what was hard? Do you want to just maybe? Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I think you keep getting distracted, your thoughts keep going to a lot of other stuff, right? And that's just the way the mind works, so no worries at all. So I just wanted to begin with this so that you feel at least a tad bit more centered than you were feeling before, right? And with that, this whole discussion on empathy, I just wanted to begin with a story. So the lady you see over there, her name is Beecher Stowe, like Harriet Beecher Stowe. And she used to live in the 19th century, right? So she was born somewhere in the early 1800s. And so she was born in a typical American family, right? A white woman who had all the privileges, right? So she had a very rich, very educated sort of an upbringing. People loved her. In fact, she got married to her best friend, right? And she had 7 beautiful children, right? And so she used to live in Cincinnati, right? And one thing she would observe those days is how very often African slaves used to be brought into Cincinnati, right? And obviously it didn't really have much of a bearing on her life, right? I mean, she was living her ordinary life. But as a matter of fact, she was very, very aware of what was happening around her. She would meet some of these slaves. She would speak to them now and then. But it didn't really bother her much, right? And she would just continue living her life. And then what happened is, around 1851, a huge tragedy struck like Harriet. What happened is she lost her 18-month-old baby, right? And that was very, very devastating for her. And for any of you who are mothers, you would know how unimaginably painful that can be, right? And but what this did was that Harriet could, for the first time, so strongly empathize with African slave mothers from whom their babies used to just get snatched from their hands to be sold in the slave market. It was a very, very common practice those days, right? And Harriet could, so deeply empathize and so deeply connect with these mothers at that point that it led her to write this book that you see there called Uncle Tom's Cabin, right? And it had the story of a slave boy who was actually taken away from his family to be sold in the slave market, right? And the horrendous, the horrifying things that she had mentioned about slavery in that book then led to widespread protests, like revolutionary protests across the West. The book became a huge bestseller. In the very first year of its publication, more than 300,000 copies of the book was sold in the US alone, and then more than 1 million in Great Britain, right? And after all of this, like I think even today, there are sessions when I go for them, sometimes people tell them that they had to study this in their, literature classes and all of that, right? So it has been published in more than 75 different languages. But the point I'm trying to make is the power of empathy, right? Here is a white American woman who absolutely had no experience of slavery, but she became one of the reasons why several years later, these revolutionary protests then led to anti-slavery policies across the world, right? And that is the power of empathy. Like, that's how, when you have similar experiences, you really tend to connect with somebody's experience and then really reform. So before we go ahead, what is empathy, right? There are different ways of saying it. So I just wanted to hear from you, like, what do you think empathy is? Maybe just one or two definitions, or like, what do you feel empathy is? Anyone? Beautiful, right? I think that's the most common way of understanding empathy, right? Like putting yourself in somebody else's shoes so that you can understand their feelings or know their feelings. Anybody else? Anything else that you want to add to it? Yeah? Beautiful. Wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely. So it begins with removing your shoes first, right? Right? And then stepping into somebody else's shoes. Beautiful, beautiful. Anything else? All right. So this is what empathy is. It's not my definition. I've borrowed it from Carl Rogers, who's one of the most popular humanist psychologists we had. Empathy is the ability to understand another person's experience in the world, right? As if you were that person without ever losing the as-if sense. That's very important, right? That's a huge part of empathy, right? As if you were that person without ever losing the as-if sense. I hope that makes sense, and if not, like in the next discussion, I'll clear that up. So this is something I've conceptualized, the 5-part empathy model, right? So I believe that for empathy to be empathy, right, you need to cover like all 5 of these, and that's when it becomes empathy in the most accurate, in the most powerful form, right? The first one is cognitive empathy. Cognition, basically, it's just thinking, right? Like, so for example, if I'm trying to really understand what exactly you're thinking at a certain point, then that's cognitive empathy. And to take an example, like imagine one of your best friends is going through, let's say, a divorce, right? And it's a very, very hard time. So just trying to imagine what sort of thoughts are going through this person's mind, that's basically cognitive empathy. So what do you think are some of the things that are going through your friend's mind? How do I face the world? Maybe, right? what's my future going to look like, right? So anything else that you want to like say? How will I be perceived by others? Exactly. Feeling of loss, more than that, like that's a feeling. So that's what, yeah, that'll be, so cognitively, what would she think because of the pain, because of this feeling of loss? Like, how am I going to handle, like, this pain or something like that, right? How am I going to survive? Brilliant, right? So you get the distinction, right? So your thoughts, the specific thoughts that come into somebody else's, trying to get an understanding of these thoughts, that's cognitive empathy. Then you have affective empathy. Affective is basically what you just said, like pain or like, feelings of like, what feelings do you think she goes through? Affect is basically feelings. So what emotions or feelings do you think, your friend who's going through a divorce might feel? Fear, sense of loss, anger, definitely, yeah, right? A deep sense of sorrow, sadness, right? So all of that would be what constitutes affective empathy. In the sense when we try to understand, like, okay, these are some of the thoughts that he or she is going through, that's affective empathy. And then compassionate empathy is basically understanding what somebody else's thoughts are, what their feelings are, and then taking some action that would be beneficial to that person, right? Like, for example, in this case, what could you do for your friend? Listen. Be there, right? Maybe just listen to this person, right? And all the other stuff, like anything that you do for him or her that's going to just make their life a little easier, all of that would come under compassionate empathy. And then those usually get discussed everywhere, but the next two are the ones that we really, like, that I really want to focus on. And the fourth one is self-other differentiation. What does that mean? And that's connected to the asif condition that Carl Rogers was talking about, right? So self-other differentiation is basically like when you're trying to empathize with another person, doing that with the realization that their world is theirs and my world is distinct and separate from it. And when you don't do that, what happens? Emotional contagion, right? Or compassion fatigue. Then what happens is if someone's going through a lot of pain and you're really trying to empathize with them and you're literally like just there with them, right? You're also getting bogged down and it's getting too hard for you as well. So in the sense, nobody really benefits, right? Which is why for empathy to be practiced in its most powerful sense and for there to be some positive outcome, you really have to like separate yourself from, and I'm not saying you have to be very distant, there's a balance to everything, right? But at least have it in your mind that, okay, this person's world is his and my world is distinct and separate from it. I mean, for any of you who have like, Indian parents typically, like, have you ever had a situation where you're going through like a really difficult time and then they are like, oh my God, like, my life is like, so in the sense, like literally just hijacking the pain or the, or the stuff that you're going through because, obviously like what happens to kids also affects like parents, right? But, a healthier way would be if they could just like have some sense of like a boundary. Then what happens is they will be in a better position to maybe support, the person who's going through a difficulty. So just that self-other differentiation. And then the last one is empathy is not the same as projection, right? Which is basically what you were talking about when you said remove your shoes before you step into somebody else's. Because otherwise, or to be very, very honest, what people usually consider empathy to be is just projection, right? We all do that. Like, it's often very subconscious in nature, right? So when we usually try to empathize with somebody else, what do? We take along all our, like, sort of, like, just as an example. If, for example, your friend is talking about the divorce experience to probably you and I, like, to one of you and to me as well. So the way I see it is like maybe I start crying when I hear about this, right? Maybe one of you just starts getting angry, right? So there are different ways in which people perceive, people kind of deal with the very same stimulus. Like the very same thing can cause very different reactions in different people, right? And so we need to be very aware of that. So just because I'm someone who cries, I can't assume that, anybody who hears about like my friend's story, the first thing they do is going to be like crying. It's just a very basic sort of an example, but just to make my point, right? So empathy is not the same as projection. Extremely important to remember that. So yeah, now that we've just mentioned what empathy is, I'm going to take you through an activity, but it's just nothing major. Like, I'll just show you a picture, right? And what I want you to do is just imagine that you actually are the person in the picture, right? You have to like really become that person, right? And then I want you to just like, maybe you all have notes, like you all have a pen or a paper and all of that with you, right? Just make notes as to what are the first things that come into your mind. Right, basically what we are trying to do is, I know it's hard, I mean, without really talking to somebody, without really knowing somebody, just to like, you may feel like you're just judging them, but what I want you to do is, I just want you to like, what are the things that come to your mind, and just so in this case, this is the picture, right? So let's imagine like, we're just like taking a walk, like, or we're just visiting a village, all of us together, let's say, right? And then what we do is we go to the interiors, we're just like talking to different people, learning about different things, and let's say it's just like an experiential sort of a walk we are doing. And then we come across this person, right? We come across this person, and what I want you to imagine is like, think about this person's life. Like really think about it, just become this person who lives in this very, very sort of rural place somewhere. And ask yourself, like, what thoughts are running through my head right now? Who or what am I thinking about as this person, right? You're this person now. So what thoughts? So just try to put into practice, like just try to exercise your empathy muscles, like based on like the cognitive empathy, affective empathy, all of these. So what thoughts are possibly running through my head? Who or what am I thinking about? Yeah, I mean, we don't have the option of actually going and, speaking to him and getting all information, right? So it's just an activity where imagine you are this person. Okay, you are this person. So which is why the question is like, what thoughts are running through my head? Like what's happening to me? Like, so as this person, what thoughts are running through your head? What or who possibly am I thinking about? Use your imagination, like it's just like an imaginative empathy exercise. It's really hot, wonderful. How will I survive? Will I get food today? Beautiful, yeah. Why are you clicking my picture? My body hurts. When will it rain? Lovely. I believe in simplicity. Nice. Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe he has a better life than all of us. We never know. But yeah. I'm satisfied with what I have. Yeah. True. Children may have moved away. Yeah. Oh, possibly. He's thinking less is more. Beautiful. So we have like, you're like great imaginative empathy. I mean, you're thinking from all perspectives. Huh? You're not thinking about anything. You're just like, okay, Zen mode. Yeah. This is my home, yeah. One day at a time. I really wish we had that life. Anything else? Uncertainty. Could be anything, right? Like emotions, but that's what, like I'm just asking you to just like, whatever comes to your mind, right? That's cognitive, like, yeah, like thoughts, but like, this is like, yeah, another group has come to like, observe me, yeah. I don't care, yeah. What does my body feel like? Healthy? Yeah, lean. We wish we had that body, right? Yeah. All right. So like, how would I, so this is a very subtle thing. Let's see if you can catch it. Like, but how would I experience this person's life, right? That's what we have been discussing so far, which is good, which is where empathy begins. Like, at least we are there. 2, how would he experience his life? Just let's take us out of the picture, and then, which is basically self-other differentiation, right? Anytime we see anybody, we are trying to empathize with anybody. Obviously, what we do is we bring along our extensive experience, our conditioning, our biases that we've got, like as we grew up, and then we look at the other person, and then we make all these assumptions, right? But over here, so how would I experience this person's life when we make a change or a shift to how would he experience his life without all my without my shoes there, like then how do you think he might feel? And I think that's probably the reason why I think at least most of you get it, because otherwise you wouldn't have thought of even the other positive aspects, because a general tendency for us is the moment we see this picture of poor thing, such a poor sad life sort of a thing. But then a lot of you also spoke about contentment and all of that, which is possibly because you were trying to put aside your prejudices, biases. Not surprising, because most of you are DEI specialists, right? And then really trying to step into his so here I really want to now tell you who this person is, right? This is Dr. Alok Sagar, if any of you have heard about him, right? So he completed his electronic engineering from IIT Delhi, right? And then he went on to do his master's from IIT Delhi, and then he went on to do his PhD from the University of Houston in Texas in the US, right? After which he came back to IIT Delhi and he taught there for a couple of years, right? But then he felt so strongly that he wanted to take up something in the social world. He wanted to, spend his life for social causes. So he decided that he's going to, leave his very, very comfortable job and take care of tribals. He's going to serve tribals, right? And that's what he does. So he lives in Madhya Pradesh, where he takes care of 2 tribal communities in Madhya Pradesh, right? He's also someone who's very passionate about the environment, right? And women empowerment and all of these stuff. So that's what he does. And in fact, he's even planted 50,000 trees, apparently. And you all know Raghuram Rajan? Yeah, this was his professor, right? Yeah. So I think 2 things from this. One is it kind of brings out our very, very subconscious sort of prejudices, right? It's not something that we plan on doing. We really don't want to really think something else of a person, but look at how different somebody's life and the depth of their story. It's very, very hard for us to pinpoint, right? It's very, very hard for us to pinpoint somebody's life, somebody's story, and this could be the case with a lot of us here. I mean, looking at somebody over here, I might have some perceptions, or I might have certain things just come up for me. They might be so different from the sort of life you've lived, the sort of experiences you've had, right? So yeah, just that. And then there's another activity as well. So I'm going to tell you about a person, right? I'm just going to give you some clues about this person, and I want you to visualize this person. Let's see what comes into your mind, right? I really want you to visualize this person, right? So this person's name is Kelvin, right? He's the youngest person to participate in MIT's Visitors Practitioners Program, right? He's lectured to undergraduate students at Harvard University. His story has been documented by the CNN. He has spoken years ago at TEDx Teen. And right now he runs something called Kelvin Doe Foundation, right? So with these bits and pieces of information, just like what is the visual image that comes into your mind, right? Try to imagine this person vividly in your mind. Suppose, like for example, he's one of the speakers here and he hasn't arrived yet. And we're all looking through his bio and he's like, oh, so impressive. Who is this person? And so obviously we tend to have some sort of, an idea in our head, right? What does he look like? How old is he? Where is he from? And what do you think about his family's economic status? Knowledgeable, yeah? Yeah. Someone very knowledgeable who speaks at different forums, definitely. How old do you think he is? This was from a few years ago, like the TEDx Teen and all, like a clue, but still? And what picture comes to your mind? Which part of the world do you think he's from?
Western side, US kind of.
Yeah.
He's 13 and differently able.
Okay. All right. So I guess because of the Rajan's professor experience now, it's very scary, right? To say anything because it could be so different, right, from what I imagine. And yeah. So no worries. So this is Kelvin Doe, right? He's from the Republic of Sierra Leone, which is a country in West Africa, right? And he's famous for having taught himself engineering at the mere age of 13, right? So what he would do is he just collects scraps from different places, and then he is famous for having built his own radio station, right, in Sierra Leone, through which he would then broadcast news and songs and everything under the name DJ Focus. So he's more known as DJ Focus, right? So I think he is in his mid to late 20s now, right? And yeah, that's Kelvin Doe. But again, like, just to also bring out two things, like bias and prejudice, we don't usually, like, very often do it on purpose, right? It's very subconscious in nature, but the harm and the difficulties that can come out as part of it, right? I mean, you're going through a biodata or a CV. I mean, the sort of pictures that immediately come to your mind, right? You see somebody, like, including me today, like maybe the first time you looked at me, a lot of people tell me, like, there's a whole different picture that probably just comes to your mind when you see somebody, right? And this bias or prejudice, it's possibly the greatest barrier to empathy. Or to even put it in a better way, empathy is the antidote to prejudice, right? Empathy is the most powerful antidote we have to prejudice, right? And it's hard work. It's very, very hard work. I mean, I've been doing this work for 8 years, solely empathy, training. And trust me, I've learned everything like there is to learn, but still it's so hard. It's so hard on certain occasions and in certain places to apply empathy the way it should be, right? And these are the ways you do it: intentionally practice it and systematic training. Like, these are the two ways in which you strengthen empathy, right? So I was just having a discussion with Ravi earlier, like while we were sitting there, and one of the questions he asked us, like, is this something that you can develop, right, in people? And what research says is more than 98% of the people in the world are capable of empathy. It's just about practice and training, right? With that, people are capable of becoming more empathic in nature, right? The other 2%, it's just because they probably have some very serious physiological problem, like in the brain or something like that. Like, otherwise, every human being is hardwired to practice empathy. Now, how is empathy connected to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? I mean, we are talking about DEI. So this is basically the communication, or like the strategy or the message that I give every client that I've ever worked with. If your focus foremost is on building an empathic culture, right? Which I don't know how many of you like have thought of it that way. Like, if you really do build an empathic culture within your workplace, the natural consequence of that will be diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you and your workplace is naturally empathic, or if you have developed empathy, then it's not very hard for you to have a diverse sort of a workforce, and you will have equitable, probably, like policies in place, and inclusion will just be a natural byproduct of the empathy that you bring into your culture, right? And when you have diversity, equity, and inclusion this way, then a natural consequence of that is belonging, right? When you have an empathic culture, which then leads to these practices, then you naturally tend to have belonging, where people feel psychologically safe, while coming to work. So now, like, how can you strengthen empathy practice, right? Very, very important. I mean, all this, like, talk about empathy just as a concept, but like, what are some ways in which you actually can develop it, right? And this is where self-empathy is so critical. Self-empathy, self-awareness, or mindfulness. Like, the reason why, like, they're all different, but I connect them. And I just want to share an experience that I've had in order to highlight how critical this is, right? So just like, I think it was last year, I was on my way. I live in Cochin, by the way, like in Kerala. So I was on my way to deliver a workshop, and I was in a rickshaw, right? And what happened is, my younger brother, he actually studies in the UK, right? And so he does all these like odd delivery jobs on the side so that he can make some extra money. So anytime I see a Zomato or a Swiggy like delivery guy, I immediately think about my brother, right? And so this day, as usual, I was going in the rec, and then I'm just like looking far. And so from that side, like towards me, there is this Zomato guy coming, right? And his face, he was very young. And the reason why I observed him is because he's around my brother's age. He looked kind of like my brother, like very lean and, tall. And so I was just observing him, and I was just wondering, good Lord, like what is going through this person's mind that's like, early in the morning, like, the sort of stress on his face, right? And I was thinking, like, would my brother be doing a work like this? How much would he actually be going through, like doing such odd works in the UK, in a country that he doesn't even know? So all these thoughts were just like, again, going through my mind. Then what happens is this boy just like comes closer and takes this really wide U-turn right in front of like, the rickshaw that I was in. And then he just like goes on his way, right? And the rickshaw guy, obviously, he had to halt. And I, fell forward, hit my face against like the back of his, seat. Nothing happened, thankfully, but then we heard this loud noise. And what had happened is there was a bike that was speeding, like, behind. It kind of, fell, and the guy just like went ahead and like crashed against a railing on the side, right? And then he had clearly broken his leg, and he wasn't in a good condition, and he was crying, and it just seemed so sad. And so we took him to a hospital, and believe it or not, the sad thing is, the hospital was just like 200 meters away, and he was a doctor there, right? And he, and this accident happened just 200 meters away from like, his workplace. And, and I was just thinking, God, like, had he just like gotten there before the whole mess up? But the most surprising thing about the entire thing, for me, at least the lesson or like this powerful like sort of insight I gained, was the fact that the guy, like the Zomato guy, he had just like fled away. He had no idea the sort of like, chaos he had created like behind him, like just because he was so obsessed with whatever was going on in his life. And the reason why I say that is most of us are like that in our lives. Right? We have so much happening in our own lives, like there's so much going on, and we are so focused on all of that. What happens is, without even realizing it, very, very subconsciously, we end up creating a mess like here and there as we go through life, right? This is a reality. And the sad part of it is that, many times we are not even aware of it, just like the Zomato guy. We don't even know that this is the impact we are having on other people, be it at a workplace, be it at your homes, right? Everywhere. So self-empathy is basically just the ability to create space within yourself so that you can hold the perspectives of others. Let's say like you belong to a totally different sort of, like you have a very, very different opinion on something, and I come to you and we are having a discussion. How do you think that'll go? Like, how does it usually go for all of us, right? So, just self-empathy is just being able to create some space in our heads. And usually what happens is we are so full. I can give you an example. Like very recently, I've co-founded an organization in the US, like called Origins Consulting, which is, mostly DEI work. And one of the clients that we had, you all know what's happening in the Middle East right now, right? With Israel and Palestine, right? And so what happened is this client specifically approached us, asking us to do a session, like a series of sessions actually, for all their employees across the globe. It's a Fortune 500 company, by the way. Because what's happening is, especially in the US, they're so tied to the whole conflict that there are employees who are Muslims in the same company, and there are employees who are Jews in the same company, and it's just getting really bad within the organization, like the office space, like people meet each other in opposing rallies, like, while they're going out, and then they come to the office, and it's so difficult for them to even face each other, and all these sort of complaints are coming to the, to the HR team, and they are clueless as to what they need to do. And I remember the first, so what we suggested is, we said that, like, anything we say, me and my partner, like, anything we say is going to hurt somebody in that, in the group. But we can give it a shot. And the very first session, I remember how horrible it went, because anything as soon as the session began, chats, like people started like picking at each other in the chat. And so basically what happens is, when you're so full of emotions, when you're so full of thoughts, emotions, whatever, like sensations, all because of your life experiences, it's almost impossible for you to forget empathy, to even listen to somebody else, right? You won't even listen to what someone else is telling you. Like imagine like the number of times you've had a difficult work day, you're sitting in your office, one of your employees comes to talk to you. How much of your presence are you able to give that person, right? Because you're so full of whatever you are going through, right? And so self-empathy is just being able to create some space within yourself so that when someone comes to you, you're able to kind of really, be a little curious, be a little more open, and like, even if you don't agree with that perspective, okay, what could this person be? Like, where does he come from? Like, why does he feel this way? Like, just that willingness, right, to explore, just that space, within yourself. So that's basically what self-empathy is. Self-empathy, obviously, is tied to self-awareness, being very, very aware of where you are, what thoughts, what feelings, what's going on within you. And then it's also connected to mindfulness, right? Just being present, like I said. And so there are 3 different types of like awareness, and I'll be spending a little more time on self-empathy because I feel it's like, there's no point even talking about empathy or diversity, equity, inclusion, or belonging or anything if this aspect is just not there. This is where it all begins, self-empathy or self-awareness. If we don't have that, it's pointless, right? So physiological awareness. And what's physiological awareness? What are emotions, right? According to psychologists, like people who face really difficult psychological problems like later in life, like bipolar disorder or all these personality disorders and all these like really difficult sort of disorders later in life, they are people who right from a young age find it very difficult to differentiate between different emotions, right? So it's very, very important that we know exactly like what emotions are, like, what does happiness feel like, what does sadness feel like, more for the benefit of your kids as well, like, It's very important that children also grow up learning, like, what does sadness feel like what exactly is like happiness, what is anger, sort of a thing. Where do they stem from? Where do all these feelings come from, right? And what happens to your body when you feel different emotions? Do any of you know, like when you're angry, what exactly happens in different parts of yourself? Have you ever sat down and just like reflected on that? And all of this is very, very connected because we live in times when all sorts of diseases, including, what is it called? We have very autoimmune diseases, right? Where like your immune system just starts attacking yourself. This is unheard of in the past, right? Depression, like we are apparently the most depressed and most lonely generation in the history of the world. I mean, how sad is that, right? And the number of cases of, fibromyalgia, it's a disease where, you just have body pain and nobody knows why. Doctors do all kinds of tests and they can't find out. And it's all psychosomatic disorders where because your mind is not in the right place, because you're like emotionally and psychologically not in a good place, it all comes out as, physical symptoms in your body, right? So this is why it's so critical that you know these stuff, right? Just like how, it's very, very evolutionary in nature, to be honest, very, very evolutionary in nature in the sense, at one point in time, yeah, obviously when there's a tiger or something that's coming to attack you when you live, like when you used to live in caves, your body really had to kind of, do that trigger system so that, your body can immediately fight, flight, freeze, and all these responses come. But today, the tiger of the past has become like maybe some comment from your manager or something that your husband or your wife says or something that your kids do, right? Imagine like, we're comparing it to like tigers, like, actual threat for life, right? And imagine the sort of like changes, physiological changes your body is going to go through then. And so which is why it's very, very important to be aware of, a lot of these things. Trauma awareness, like we also should speak about trauma awareness. How is your past affecting your future, right? The reason being like this is such a subconscious, like sort of, more than 95% of everything that happens, like 90 to 95% of everything that we do and things happen for us, typically for a person who's not very self-aware, it's all subconscious in nature. You're not even aware of a lot of things. Like, for example, there is this very, very fascinating example that I usually give. Imagine you watched a cartoon as a kid, right? And in the cartoon, there was this villain character and you hated this character. He's like, ugh, right? And especially as kid, you have these like, very strong feelings against the character. Then you grow up, right? And now you're like, let's say an HR manager, you're working in an organization and one day an employee just comes, like a person comes in for an interview, right? Something about the person, it could be the voice, it could be the way they look, it could be the way their, like actions are, something about them reminds you immediately of whom? the villainous cartoon character, but you are not aware of that. But subconsciously, that's what's happening. You're connecting this person to this childhood experience of yours, and for some reason, you just don't like this person. How many times have we personally experienced that? We see somebody and, I just can't stand this person. Or someone calls, it could be a customer care service executive, and the moment you hear his voice, you're like, you just don't like them. I mean, these are very, very subconsciously, occurring processes. How adverse childhood experiences are manifesting today. How is something that happened in the past affecting you today? And how aware are you of your subconscious reactions and processes? When these things happen, how is it that you react? That's the most important, critical part, right? That we really need to learn to manage, right? And also awareness regarding your biases and conditioning, right? Like we discussed earlier, right? So many cognitive biases that I could talk to you about, right from abstract thinking to, selective, lots of them, labeling, and overgeneralization, magnification, minimization. We have hundreds of cognitive biases that we, without even realizing it, we employ it on a day-to-day basis, right? So we are a little short on time, so I'm going to just skip through some of the stuff. And again, something else over here connected to trauma is also defense mechanisms, right? It's a very, very psychological thing, but there are these defense mechanisms that we so strongly hold, right? Which kind of adversely affect the way we live our lives, right? And I'll give you some examples of defense mechanisms because I feel it's very important. It could be something like denial. Someone tells you have this really horrible disease. Some people the immediate way we deal with this, because we're just not able to take the pain. So what we do is we just deny it. We live for several times denying it, and that ultimately, but without even realizing it, we probably show our frustration or pain in other ways with people around us, right? That's one thing. There's projection that we discussed earlier. This displacement, very, very common. Like for example, something really bad happens at work. You go back home and you just scream at your kid, the sort of emotion you should have shown your, manager, whoever, at the workplace. Instead, you just decide to displace it somewhere else, right? So displacement, there's, sublimation, which is the only good defense mechanism. Sublimation is where, all this pain, or when you're going through a really difficult time, you choose to kind of put it, or just for example, you just have a breakup and then you go and just start working out, right? That's sublimation, where all this negative, pain and everything, you put it out or you show it out in a more positive sort of a way, workouts. So that's sublimation. And there's repression, one of the most dangerous ones, which a lot of people struggle with without even knowing about it. Have you all watched the Spotlight? There was a movie. It was an Academy Award winning movie called The Spotlight. It was about the church, the Catholic Church, and a lot of kids being molested, and how Boston Globe's investigative reporting team kind of dug up some. So I was reading about this case where a person, he's been visiting a psychiatrist for a long time. He had no idea what's going on, but he just said that I'm not having a good, relationship with my wife. I'm not able to, sustain a good relationship with her, and especially in the bedroom, nothing works for us and all of that. And he had no idea why, because his wife was perfect in every way. Everything was, good. And then what happens is one day he sees a newspaper, and there was apparently a newspaper report about a priest who has just been arrested. And just looking at that picture, he just went crazy. And then he, went to the psychiatrist. Then the psychiatrist, that's when the healing began. So basically what happened is he has been molested for years as a kid. And he had absolutely no memory of it until and unless he actually saw the picture of the priest. The reason being, you repress these sort of memories, because as a young kid, it's so painful to go through such adverse experiences. What do? You immediately push them to the side, and you just prefer not to really even think about these sort of stuff, right? So which is why, being aware of, be it trauma, be it biases, conditioning, getting help from licensed people for these sort of work, doing that inner work is so, so critical. All of this comes into how DEI, culture building, everything ultimately show up or ultimately happen in workplaces. And so I'll just tell you, like, how can you develop empathy through awareness? There's no time, so I'll just, like, meditation. It's so powerful, believe it or not, like, or even intentionally slowing down. And I don't mean, like, the really, like, monk kind of, like, level meditation, no, but at least just, like, breathing exercises, right? What happens is, there are studies that show, like, within a few months, the structure of your brain literally changes, like neuroplasticity. It's that powerful, right? Journaling, another very, very powerful thing. Physical exercise. And so the next thing is humanization. Basically, it's a word that we use a lot in the DEI space, like just humanizing with people. This is Oscar Schindler's story, but then maybe I'll skip that. And how do you develop, like, or how do you become or practice humanization? By diversifying your inner circle, your trust circle, right? Develop friendships with people who are very, very different from you instead of just sticking to, a certain kind of people, like an active listening, where you listen not just for words, but also the feelings and the needs behind these words, right? Practice curiosity. One of the best, like, consume media wisely. I can't even, like, stress on this enough in this day and age, but very, very important. And read widely, and not just like anything. Fiction is something that really, research says you read fiction, it helps with empathy building, but also include books on cultures and history, so you're more open to other cultures. And the sort of things you see on social media and, like, television may not be what a certain culture actually looks like. And understand that you're an everyday leader. And I just wanted to end with this, again, with an experience that I've had, right, where during one workshop, so this was for, I think it was for a university in Dubai, and then we had, like, a lot of teachers, and there were also examination controllers who were part of the workshop. And so while discussing this whole concept of everyday leadership, there was this guy named Saad, and Saad was like, oh, I really have a story to share, and it's so powerful that I try to share it wherever I go. And what happened with Saad is on his very first day at work. Just think about all of your first day at work. I mean, how stressful, how scary, like, you're literally, like, so scared of making mistakes and what's going to happen. So Saad was in that sort of a state, and then, and so he walks into, like, this room, and there were, like, lots of lots of kids. And Saad had just passed out of college, right? So he was also, like, most of them were much bigger than him in size and, all loud. And so he was like, is anyone going to listen to me? So he was just, like, covering in, like, the corner of the room, wondering what to do, like, just paralyzed with fear. And then what happens is there is this other person, his name is Bilal, right? Bilal just crosses by the room, right? And just passes by the room, and then he notices that Saad is just staying in one corner. So Bilal quickly goes to Saad and just holds him by the shoulder and just tells him, Saad, it's okay, like, just say what you have to say and everybody will listen to you. And then he goes on his way. And just, like, momentarily getting some strength from that, he starts, just speaking up, giving instructions, and students listen to him. Just like Bilal said, everything just, like, goes on beautifully, and he has one of the best first days at work, right? And the reason why I say this is, Saad went ahead and said that every time he then faced any difficulty in his life, be it in any domain, Bilal's words would always come into his mind, right? Which is so powerful. And Saad was, in fact, sharing the story with us in a classroom, like, I think it was nearly 15 years after the experience, right? Nobody knew where Bilal is, but look at the sort of profound impact that one person's action, like, for what, like 5 seconds, kind of had on somebody else. And the reason why I say that is very often we assume that it's only, like, the best of leaders in the topmost positions who kind of have that sort of an influence, but it's important to remember that each and every one of us on a day-to-day basis are everyday leaders, and the words we use, the things we do, they have, like, a crazy, huge impact on the people that we touch, like, or see on a day-to-day basis, right? And I just wanted to remind you of that. And with that, yeah, we are done. I don't think there'll be time for questions. If you have anything at all, you have any comments, questions, you can, like, come meet me, like, after, maybe during the break or something like that. But appreciate your attention, and thank you so much.